To know more such amazing stories from Indian history, click the bell icon and subscribe to Live History India. These beautiful ruins of the lost city of Mandu never fail to take a visitor's breath away. With its symmetric proportions, exquisite waterways, and a grand setting, the palaces of Mandu can truly be called a poetry in stone. Sadly, this is all that remains of the lost city of Shadiabad, or the City of Joy, the capital of the Sultanate of Malwa in the 15th and the 16th centuries. Located around 84 kilometers from Indore, Mandu is situated on a high plateau in Dhar district of Madhya Pradesh. The place gets its name Mandu from Mandapa Durga, or the Mandapa Fort as it was originally called, and it gained prominence in the 10th and 11th centuries under the Parmar dynasty. Its location at an elevation of 633 meters, overlooking the plateau of Malwa to the north and the valley of the Narmada River to the south, acted as natural defenses, and this made it a perfect fort capital for the Parmaras. To know more about the story of Mandu and its rulers, we spoke to historian Pushkar Sohni, who shared his perspectives on this now lost city.
Mandu, which is a hilltop city, used to be a capital of the Parmaras, the dynasty that ruled over Malwa before the Delhi Sultanate invaded. The Parmaras actually were based out of Dhar, but because they suffered a number of invasions from the Yadavas, from Gujarat, from the Delhi Sultans, they shifted their capital on top of a hill, which was a lot more defensible. And Mandavgarh, as it was known, became their functional capital for a while. Of course, the Delhi Sultanate takes over and Mandu becomes one of the important capitals of the province of Malwa, which they acquire. And then governors of Malwa rebel against the Delhi Sultans when Delhi is invaded by Timur, and the Sultanate of Mandu comes into being. It is a spectacular sight. Again, there are very few capitals like this which are completely on a mesa, on a hill.
Sadly, almost nothing of the Parmara period survives in Mandu today.
Unfortunately, no, that there are some temples there, but again, everything has been heavily reworked, not just by the sultans of Delhi, the sultans of Malwa, but also by the Mughals. I mean, Mughal emperors, including Akbar, make visits to Mandu. They are very impressed by the setting, by the natural beauty, by the buildings there. And they also commission either some kind of repairs, restoration, or some small new buildings. But the physical, stamp of the sultans of Malwa is the strongest in Mandu.
In 1305, the Parmara rule ended over Mandu when the armies of Sultan Alauddin Khilji captured Malwa. It would remain under the Delhi Sultanate for the next 90 years, by end of which the Delhi Sultanate itself began to crumble.
The sultans of Delhi, particularly the Khalji and Tughlaq dynasties, captured large provinces all across India, all the way down to Madura and so on. So first it's Alauddin Khilji and then it's Muhammad bin Tughlaq. And after making all these conquests and after an aborted attempt to move their capital to Daulatabad, which would be in the center of the empire, they moved back north to Delhi. And every time power in Delhi seems to weaken, these provinces start declaring rebellion and independence. Governors who have been appointed, whether it's in Madurai, whether it's the Bahmani governors, whether it's the governor of Gujarat or the governor of Khandesh or Malwa, all of them will rebel and declare independence. Uh, and Malwa also has a very similar story where Alauddin Khilji captures Malwa from the Parmaras. And you do have a number of governors who uh, govern the area on behalf of the Delhi Sultan. But when Timur came to Delhi around 1400, the governor of Malwa, Dilawar Khan, basically declared his own dynasty, the Ghuri dynasty, uh, in Dhar and said, we are going to be independent sultans now. And his son, Hoshang Shah, really shifts the capital from Dhar to Mandu. And Hoshang Shah is also responsible for a number of monuments that get built in Mandu.
A new phase in Mandu's history began in 1392 when Dilawar Khan Ghori, a governor of the Delhi Sultanate, declared his independence and established what would be called the Malwa Sultanate. The first capital of the Malwa Sultanate was the city of Dhar, located 38 kilometers north of Mandu.
Dhar is a short-lived capital because though Hoshang really moves to Mandu, Dilawar also realizes the importance of Mandu. After all, like we said, it's the more defensible place. And it's renamed Shadiabad. Shadi, of course, means joy or celebration. So Shadiabad means the city of joy. And Hoshang Shah is a lot more ambitious and oversees a number of monuments, including his own tomb built completely out of marble, one of the first buildings in India that we know of that is designed such. Dhar, of course, has the importance of being an older capital. It is a prestige city. To control it means a lot. To rule from there also means a lot. The Sultanate era monuments in Dhar are a couple of old mosques, including the Lat Masjid, and also a lot of inscriptions in places. Now, Dhar retains its importance even through the 18th century when Raghoba, the uncle of the Peshwa, seeks refuge there. The Holkars also have some presence there, and eventually Dhar will be ruled by the Huars, princely state in the 19th century.
One of the most interesting places in Dhar is what is believed to be the Bhojshala, a science academy said to have been built by the Parmara king Raja Bhoj in the 11th century.
Well, the Bhojshala in many ways is like a lot of the early conquest mosques built out of spolia, which is to say parts of earlier buildings that stood there, some of which might have been temples. It's assembled much in the way as the Quwat al-Islam Mosque, the Mehrauli Mosque in Delhi, or the Conquest Mosque at Daulatabad, the Jami Masjid, now known as the Bharat Mata Mandir. So temple columns get used to create these long arcades around the courtyard. And, given the kind of strong and animated feelings people have about the origins and transformation of sites through time, it has been the center of controversies where people think it should really come back.
It was the shifting of the capital of the Malwa Sultanate from Dhar to Mandu in the early 15th century by Sultan Hoshang Shah that saw the creation of the magnificent buildings that Mandu would become famous for.
Well, the capital gets shifted to Mandu because Mandu is strategically more important. It controls a significant pass that goes down into the Deccan. In many ways, Malwa is thought of as the gateway to the Deccan. Unless you have some amount of control over Malwa, you cannot get to the south. And it is with this knowledge that the Mughals also decide to have complete control over this central band. Of course, for them, Mandu is important, but Burhanpur becomes more important. But this region is extremely important in terms of having access to the south. Hoshang Shah is a very ambitious campaigner. He strikes a number of coins, builds a number of buildings, and also carries out a number of military campaigns. he really has an ambition of making Mandu a real capital city. Uh, he rules for 27 years, which is a period that's long enough for him to construct a number of buildings which he leaves incomplete, like the Hindola Mahal or the Jahaz Mahal and several other palaces around there.
Following Hoshang Shah's death in 1435 CE, a period of chaos would follow in which Mahmud Khilji would declare himself the Sultan of Malwa. This marked the end of Ghori dynasty and the beginning of the Khilji dynasty.
So Mahmud Khilji, who is not to be confused with the Khilji dynasty of Delhi, is a general who works under Hoshang Shah and then for a short while works for his son Muhammad. But he assassinates Muhammad and sets himself up against the ruling Ghurids and also the Sultanate at Delhi and calls himself an independent sultanate. So the Malwa Sultanate actually has two dynasties. The first is the Ghurid dynasty, which we saw with Dilawar and Hoshang. And then later you have the Khilji dynasty of Malwa, which starts with Mahmud Khilji. And Mahmud Khilji also invades Gujarat. He tries to capture Champaner. He also has ambitions much like Hoshang Shah. He wants to expand the kingdom of Malwa and also make Mandu a very beautiful city. And he is credited with a number of buildings, not just at Mandu, but also in the territories of Malwa. And it's always believed that Sultan Mahmud Khilji his reign is probably the high point of the Malwa Sultanate. The Malwa Sultanate at its cultural and military achievements is probably at its zenith under him.
Mahmud Khilji would expand the Malwa Sultanate to its greatest extent, attacking Delhi in the north and Bidar in the south. He would also make Chanderi his second capital, building some magnificent buildings here, the most famous of which is the Koshak Mahal. It was during Mahmud Khilji's reign that Malwa school of art would thrive in Mandu. Two of the most extraordinary manuscripts of Malwa paintings are the Malwa Kalpa Sutra, a Jain religious text containing biographies of the Tirthankars, commissioned during the reign of Sultan Mahmud Khilji and which is now in the National Museum at Delhi, and an extraordinary cookbook called Nimat Nama, commissioned by Mahmud Khilji's son Ghiyasuddin, now in the British Library in London.
Like any good kingdom which is to survive for over a century, the sultans have made their peace with all kinds of populations, including traders. And you have a number of Jain traders who are represented at the Delhi Sultanate in court. And you also have similar Jain traders who have connections with the Malwa Sultanate. And again, there are all kinds of concessions made on both sides for a peaceful coexistence. And it's not surprising to have wealthy patrons commission good religious manuscripts in a Muslim court, even if the manuscript is a Jain manuscript or a Sanskrit manuscript. In fact, even as we see with the Nizam Shahs of Ahmednagar or the Adil Shahs of Bijapur, you also have the kings very often patronizing the production of religious manuscripts as part of their kingship. It's not necessarily an act of religious piety, but in a political role as a patron to everybody, you do commission. So religion is deployed very differently in that period than we imagine today. The Sultanate of Malwa is one of the earliest sultanates to leave behind a manuscript called the Nimat Nama. So we do not have any 15th century manuscripts from the sultanates except the one we find from Malwa. And the Nimat Nama is a fantastic manuscript because it really is a compendium of everything. It has chapters on cooking, and this is cooking before the Europeans bring New World ingredients. So it's cooking without chilies, without tomatoes, without potatoes, without a lot of things. that we think of are essential for making food. So the Nematnama, which is also known as the Nematnama-e-Nasruddin Shahi or Nasruddin Shah, literally the book of delicacies of Nasruddin Shah, is thought of as a cookbook more than anything else. There are recipes and paintings illustrating how these recipes are prepared. It was started for Ghiasuddin, the ruler of Malwa, in the late 15th century, and then his son has it completed. You do have lots of information contained in these pictures, these illustrations, particularly of garments and dresses, turbans and the kind of robes and so on. The manuscript now, of course, is in the British Library, as are a lot of other important manuscripts. And there seem to be multiple hands who have painted it. You see things like kheer and samosas, foods that we still enjoy every day, both written about, described in terms of their recipes, but also depicted in some of these paintings. And so the paintings themselves are a curious amalgam of Persian styles mixed with Western Indian styles of painting.
Mandu's glory days came to a sudden end in 1531 when Sultan Bahadur Shah of Gujarat sacked the city, annexed Malwa to Gujarat, and carried the Khilji royal family as prisoners to Champaner, his capital. Bahadur Shah would himself die at the hands of the Portuguese just 5 years later in 1536.
Bahadur Shah of Gujarat is actually again quite ambitious at one time. He's fighting the Portuguese, he's fighting the Sultanate of Malwa. The Sultans of Gujarat always want the Sultanates of Khandesh and Malwa to be vassals. They want them to behave like subordinates. And they're always trying to control battles of succession, all kinds of court intrigues in Khandesh and in Malwa. And so it's no surprise that Bahadur Shah decides to capture Malwa and Mandu. And then, of course, immediately after, Humayun, the Mughal emperor, also is at loggerheads with Bahadur Shah, basically manages to defeat Bahadur Shah completely. And Malwa in many ways, so had Bahadur Shah captured Mandu and built there, the glory of Mandu would have lasted. But Gujarat itself is taken over very quickly by the Mughals after this. And the Sultans of Gujarat never have the kind of energy to invest in Mandu. And then the Mughals take over Mandu themselves. And they make a few changes, but it's not given the same kind of importance by them as it is under the Sultanates. The Mughals have a very different economy. They have very different needs for capitals. They want something that is in the plains, and Burhanpur in Khandesh suits them much better than Mandu in Malwa.
Malwa would briefly regain its independence before its last ruler, Baz Bahadur, would be deposed by Mughal Emperor Akbar's army in 1536, and Malwa would become part of the Mughal Empire. Baz Bahadur is famous for his love story with a lady named Roopmati, but historians are still divided on the veracity of the story. What is popularly known as Roopmati's Pavilion in Mandu is actually a military outpost. During the Mughal invasion, the Mughal army under Adab Khan devastated Mandu, and Akbar himself had to march there to rein Adab Khan in. Gradually, Mandu was abandoned and reduced to ruins.
Mandu and Dhar and Chanderi still manage to have some power because you have an administrative setup there. They are collections of, centers of tax collection. It's not that they entirely lose importance, but Burhanpur becomes the imperial city for the Mughals. It becomes a more important city. The route through Burhanpur connecting north and south remains the more important route rather than the one that comes in through Mandu. So these were the two main routes that came from North India to the south, and the Burhanpur route certainly is more important in Mughal times.
Abandoned and forgotten, Mandu saw a rebirth with the advent of the British Raj in the 19th century. It served as a popular sanatorium for British officers posted in Malwa. Soon, Mandu began to be rediscovered by the wider world.
Mandu really gets rediscovered at the end of the 19th century. And then there is an interest by the rulers of Dhar who try to set up an archaeological department, invite experts to study Mandu. And because it is the kind of picturesque hilltop ruin that colonial officials love to visit, it becomes a big favorite with a number of colonial officials too who like to visit places where you can live, you can enjoy ruins, you can have a picnic, and you can come back. The ASI then absolutely takes on the job of re-understanding, re-evaluating, assessing Mandu for what it was. And I think there is a small monograph by C.S. Patil, an archaeologist from the ASI, written about Mandu, following which there were studies done by Michael Brand on some of the monuments and so on. But it still hasn't received the kind of scholarly attention that it deserves. Mandu doesn't have the kind of monographs on it that places like Bidar, Bijapur, or Gulbarga do.
Abandoned and forgotten, Mandu saw a rebirth with the advent of the British Raj in the 19th century. It served as a popular sanatorium for British officers posted in Malwa. Soon, Mandu began to be rediscovered by the wider world. What makes Mandu so special today are its great palaces, the most notable among which are the Jahaz Mahal and the Hindola Mahal. The Jahaz Mahal is surrounded by two artificial tanks called the Munj tank and the Kapoor tank. These tanks on either side of the fort are connected by a canal that ensured equal distribution of water in these two tanks when it rained heavily. When both the tanks fill up during monsoons, the Mahal looks like a ship sailing in water, thus the name Jahaz Mahal. The water from the stepwell or the Bawlis near the Jahaz Mahal was connected through three different tunnels. The first tunnel was above a fire stove which heated up the water. The second one was meant to convert this hot water to steam, and the third one supplied cold water to the palace. The cold water passing through these tunnels had an air conditioning effect on the palace during summers, while the hot water channels meant that the palace had a heated swimming pool during winters. Today, Mandu faces urban pressures much like other lost capitals across India. As a living town, pressures of real estate, with buildings and restaurants coming up right next to monuments, threaten to despoil what is a unique historic ensemble.
I think this has been a systemic problem with the way the Archaeological Survey of India uh, has viewed things to be conserved. Landscapes are never considered worth preserving. Their approach is still a 19th century approach of really having, garden follies set in manicured lawns. So individual buildings are protected, whereas the whole context needs to be protected. Uh, this is one of those rare instances where you have a medieval city, a medieval capital, almost in its entirety, uh, on a hilltop, and it should not be difficult to pass, development control regulation that would prohibit intrusive architecture from really invading the site. But it's not going to be. This really is something that governments at various levels, the state, the archaeological survey, need to take up. But I think for that there needs to be some kind of political will, whether it's the district collector, whether it's a group of interested citizens who can advocate for such development control. It's always sad to see that people try to develop and beautify places, ruining them in the process.
Today, Mandu is one of the most popular tourist destinations in central India. But the city needs much more care to ensure that the beauty of the stately medieval capital is preserved for generations to come.